And there we go. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So the objectives here: establish the project governance structure and plan and manage project phase closure. So our first topic here, topic 8, establish project governance structure. Our enablers here: determine appropriate governance for a project. So that's one of the things we need to be able to do, and define escalation paths and thresholds. So we talked about that a little bit. Or you guys should have talked about that a little bit when you talked about like cost, and I think we talked about it somewhat with schedule. When you're setting up your plan schedule, your management plan for schedule and your management plan for cost, one of the things you set was thresholds to say, hey, we're behind schedule this far, it's time to do something, or we're over budget by this much, it's time to do something. Those are those thresholds that we're talking about, and governance is going to help us out with that. So our deliverables and tools here: we're going to create a project team, identify governance structure, project change configuration control, and the tools we'll be using: meetings, leverage, organizational process assets. There's the PMIS, the project management information system, and it will update documents. Pretty simple stuff. I don't know if you need to memorize that, but something to keep in mind here. So for project governance, that's an interesting definition here. The framework, functions, processes that guide project management activities in order to create a unique product, service, result, or meet organizational, strategic, or operational goals. If you start at a unique product, service, result, that's what a project is, right? That's what we do. We create a unique product, service, or result. And so this is essentially saying this is a guide on managing the activities to do that. So pretty simple, straightforward. It's pretty self-explanatory even, but it's something to keep in mind. When we talked about the project management plan, which included schedule management plan, scope management plan, cost management plan, all of those management plans, they told us how to do the various functions within those knowledge areas. Governance directs us to say, put this in your management plan, put this in your management plan, put this in your management plan. Those are the guys that are out there that are telling us what they want, how they want to see things, how they want us to do things, and so forth. So that's our project governance kind of in a nutshell, but we've got a lot more to talk about with that. But again, a lot of it is kind of redundant on that. I find that it's a little bit of a stretch here, but if you guys have any questions, feel free to jump in and ask them. So for the project governance framework stuff, components of the framework include success and deliverable acceptance criteria. We also have that in our scope, right? When we put together our scope, we said, what's our acceptance criteria? How do we say this is done? And when we're going to verify scope, this is the criteria we're going to use to accept it. So the framework is not really telling us anything different that we already know. Again, I'm talking about how this is kind of redundant for some of the stuff that we do. Process to identify, escalate, and resolve issues. That's that whole the escalation process stuff that we have to deal with, and that is governance. I wouldn't call that necessarily redundant here. Relationship between project team, organizational groups, and external stakeholders. Governance will tell us that, hey, you have to work with these guys, you have to work with these guys, you have to do this with these guys. Governance will dictate a lot of that. A lot of it is going to be built into the project. I mean, you can't work with these if you can't work with these external stakeholders, but they're the people who are purchasing your product, well, you have to do it anyway. Governance or no governance, you have to make those connections. Project organization chart with project roles. We talked about that when we were talking about the stakeholders and the stakeholder register. The communication processes and procedures, how we're going to communicate with everybody. Phone, queue, Microsoft Teams, emails, what format people want their communications in. Do they want a dashboard? Do they want a call? Do they want a meeting? Are you going to be like as a subject of a tribunal? You're going to have a whole bunch of people there that you have to stand up and present your status or whatever. They're going to dictate that in the project governance folks. Guidelines for aligning the project governance and organizational strategy. So again, this is guidelines for guidelines to guide us in how we're doing stuff, like more redundancy there. The project lifecycle approach, governance will say, hey, we're using waterfall, we're using Agile, we're using XP, we're using whatever we're going to be using, whatever lifecycle approach we're going to use. The process for stage gate or phase reviews, we'll talk about those a lot coming up here. Process for review and approval of changes above the project manager's authority. So governance is going to tell you what you can review and approve and what you need to come to somebody else for to do that. And then the process to align internal stakeholders with project process requirements. So again, it's getting everybody on the same page. It's sort of the project manager for the project manager. I don't know really how else to say that. A lot of this is redundant type of stuff again. Does anybody have any questions so far? We're kind of just jumping in here and I'm rattling a lot of stuff off. But a lot of it is self-evident. If you have questions though, please ask. Are we good so far? Anybody have any questions on this? Okay. Project phases. Project phase is a collection of logically related project activities that culminates in a completion of one or more deliverables. So if you have, like in waterfall, you might have a planning phase, a requirements phase, a planning phase, a design phase, a build phase, a test phase. All of those would be examples of a project. I'm sorry, somebody saying something there? Hello? Okay. Anyway, those are all examples. Those are examples of the phases like in waterfall. Agile might have a totally different kind of phase depending on how you want to do that. And we produce one or more deliverables from each phase. Generally speaking, like in the example of waterfall, the planning phase tells you how you're going to work the project. The requirements phase tells you what you're going to deliver. The design phase tells you how you're going to solution this. The build phase, you're building it. But to build, you needed that design. And to do the design, you needed to know what your requirements were. And to do your requirements, you need to know what your plan was. So you're producing deliverables at the end of each phase, and then you take those and you move into the next one, particularly when we're talking about a sequential phase. So when you have phases, one phase follows the next, follows the next, follows the next. You finish this one, you take those deliverables and you work on the next phase and deliver something with those. So your outputs from one phase are your inputs from the next one. You also have overlapping phases. Trying to think of a good example of an overlapping phase, but essentially they overlap. Before you're finished with one, you're starting the next one. So the next one doesn't necessarily have deliverables from a first phase, right? Because its first phase isn't done yet, or the previous phase isn't done yet. Outputs from one phase generally are inputs to the next phase, though. That's when we're talking sequential. Any questions on this part so far? Phases are pretty simple at this point. Okay. So applying governance to the project life cycle. At the beginning of a phase, verify and validate the former assumptions made to the project, analyze risk, provide detailed explanation of the phase deliverables. So at the beginning of the phase, you're going to say, hey, verify and validate those former assumptions made to the project. Hey, we just got through this phase and we're starting the next phase. Were those assumptions that we had valid? Did we verify those as being an issue? Are they still an assumption because we can't validate them yet? You're going to analyze your risk. You're going to check things at the end of that phase, and at the beginning of the next phase, you're going to see where your risk lies. You analyze the risk. You maybe decide on some decision points, things like that, and you're going to provide detailed explanation of the phases deliverables. So at the end of this phase, we're going to have a solution. At the end of this phase, we're going to have requirements. At the end of this phase, we're going to have a plan. At the end of this phase, which is the end of the project, we're going to have the app or the building or the whatever it is we were building, whatever that unique product was. A phase can be closed or the project terminated when huge risks are involved for the project or when the objectives are no longer required. This last bullet is really important. You can pay attention to that one because we'll talk about that some more coming up. A phase especially when we're talking like at decision gates. When we talk about those phases and those decision gates, there's one of them that we call a kill point. One is a reference to a decision point along the way, and it's like, hey, for whatever reason, the project's no longer viable and we're killing the project. When we talk about the financials, we talk about sunk cost. Hey, you know what? We spent this much money, but spending more money to deliver this, it's not worth it anymore. We're throwing good money after bad, that whole kind of concept. So phases can be closed or project terminated in huge risks, or all kinds of other things can be involved with them, not just risks. I mean, it could be that all of a sudden we don't need this anymore. You know, the regulatory environment changed and you don't need to provide this anymore. You know, everybody's too busy slapping each other on the back and congratulating themselves because they don't have to do this anymore. We just have to close this up. So any questions on this, especially this third bullet? This is really important. So make sure you take a note of that. Questions? We're just flying through this, guys. Okay. Escalation paths. So we have the phase gate, a review at the end of the phase in which a decision is made to continue to the next phase, to continue with modifications or to end a project or a program. It's really important to remember that, or to end a project or a program. We can kill this thing at any one of these decision points that we have on here. Again, synonyms include a governance gate, a toll gate, a kill point. These may be important to remember, the governance gate and then the kill point and the toll gate thing for these decision gates. In the chapter in the book that you're reading, the PDF for the student handbook, they seem to question the governance gate and the kill point. So I don't know if that'll be a test question for you guys or not in reality, but it's one in here. It's used to check each phase. If each phase has fulfilled the exit criterion, is eligible to move to the next step. So we talked about your deliverables when we have a phase, like if you're in the design phase, at the end of the design phase, you should have a solution. And your exit criteria has to have the solution and 2 candidate solutions or whatever your criteria might have been before you can move forward. And then the software development project uses a specialized type of phase gate called a quality gate. I don't know if software is the only ones that do that, but yeah, at the end of that phase, do you meet quality standards at the end of that phase? Is your solution at the end of your design phase, is it quality? Is it good? Is it going to come up to muster? Do you have good candidate solutions? Did you consider the things you needed to consider? So you have a quality gate. And the same thing goes with construction. They may not call it a quality gate, but before you put the drywall up, somebody has to come in and inspect the rough-in work. And you know, so your inspectors are going to look at plumbing and look at electrical. Before you can get into that next phase of the project, the other stuff has to meet your quality standards, your code if you're building something. So any questions about this? Questions?
Matt,
yes.
How would phase gates work in an Agile project?
I'm sorry?
How would phase gates work in an Agile cycle?
Well, you know, you have iterations, and a lot of times in Agile we have an iteration. I wouldn't consider an iteration a phase. I mean, kind of technically speaking, it is, but it's very loose phase. I mean, when you agreed to do these things in the iteration, and if you got those all done, you move to the next phase. But unfortunately, with Agile, and this is where it doesn't quite fit, is if you don't finish all of the stories in there, you probably still move, and you'll just move that to the next iteration. But there's a point where you have maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 iterations, and you come to a release point. Especially when you're doing continuous deployment stuff. And when you get to that release point, that would be a phase. You would have a decision gate there. Okay, hey, we're done with these stories. We've demoed everything for the customers. They said everything was all right. We went through our acceptance criteria. We got all that stuff before we put this first minimal viable product for this first part of the project into the release, into the pipeline. it has to pass one of these decision gates. So that's where we would probably see it most in Agile, that, and of course at the end of the project, for the final project deliverables. Does that help? And, it might be based on features. It might be based on any number of things. Probably features would be the most likely candidate. Deliver these features, and then so that, it's a minimal viable product. You don't want to have a gate, a phase where you're just laying groundwork for everything and there's nothing for the customers to really see yet. So when we're talking about Agile, probably the deliverable of a feature would be the end of a phase, and your release point would probably be the target where you would deliver that. Does that help?
Yep.
Okay. It's just waterfall is an easier example for me, but yeah, that would be the Agile, looking at those releases. Okay, any other questions on that? That was a good question. Any questions? Okay. So phase-to-phase relationships. Okay, we talked about the sequential relationships and we talked about overlapping briefly. Mostly it's going to be sequential relationships. They're consecutive phases that start only when the previous phase is complete, which we just talked about. I mean, you have that decision gate. This relationship reduces the level of uncertainty, which may eliminate the option for shortening a project schedule. So you get done with this phase, you can see where you are. It's like you get through the design phase and your solution is just elegant and simple. And it's like, oh, guess what? We can reduce the project schedule by a long shot because we found some really interesting solutions in here. Those kinds of things will be happening at the end of this phase. And when you get to the next phase, you'll evaluate all of your assumptions there. Maybe your assumption was that it was going to be really complex and it was going to be nasty because you had to do this, and this, and you find out that your assumption was wrong. You'll evaluate that at the end of that phase and you say, oh, yeah, our assumption was wrong and we got a really elegant solution. So, hey, we're good. So we move forward. Overlapping relationships contain phases that start prior to the previous phase ending. This relationship increases the level of risk and may cause rework if something from the previous phase directly affects the next phase. And that, when they're talking about this here in this context, usually it's when we're speeding things up. When we talked about scheduling, I mentioned crashing and fast tracking. I don't know if you guys remember those terms. Fast tracking is when we run something that we would not normally do sequentially, we overlap it. Like I had given an example of painting and laying carpet. There's no reason why you can't lay carpet while somebody is painting, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do that because you'll get carpet fuzz in the paint and you're likely to get paint on the carpet. But they can be done separately. It's different people, it's whatever, people have to move around and they're in each other's way. And you could see this relationship increases the level of risk and may cause rework. Hey, you got to go back and repaint after you remove all the fuzz from the paint. You have to go back and, clean the carpet because you got paint on it, that kind of stuff. So in this case, they're talking about overlapping relationship as a response to being behind schedule, something like that. You're not done with this first thing, so you may find out at the end of that, if you have A is overlapping with B, or B is overlapping with A, I should say, you may find that by the time you get to the end of A that B was not really the path forward that you needed. So all that overlap on B was wasted work. In a general terms, that's what you're looking at. You really shouldn't be doing that in a project unless you have to, though. But sometimes you have to. Timelines are a bit sometimes, and you have to do things that you're not necessarily happy with doing. Any questions on this? This phase-to-phase relationship, they seem to emphasize that a lot. I would pay attention to it. It is very self-evident what they're talking about. Sequential relationships goes one after the other, and overlapping is they overlap, right? And so hopefully that's pretty straightforward. I don't know if anybody has any questions about that, but there we go. So moving forward, no questions, last call. All right. Guidelines to determine appropriate governance for a project involve organization's decision makers, Choose the appropriate governance goals and try to keep them simple. Select a group of experienced individuals to manage your governance. Practice governance for project programs and portfolios. Keep governance process transparent to the project stakeholders. Remember that governance is an evolutionary process and take advantage of the lessons you learned during it. So these are kind of basic guidelines for setting up your governance on a project. You want to get decision makers involved, because those are the folks who are going to say, at the end of the day, if you get the wrong governance people, you get the wrong people in there, the actual stakeholders that matter aren't part of it. They may say, well, you advanced this and you shouldn't have. You're spending way too much money and we weren't happy with you doing that at this decision gate or whatever. Choose your appropriate governance goals. You know, thresholds are important, are some of those governance goals that we talk about. You know, hey, what's appropriate? You know, again, if you're working on a multi-trillion-dollar or multi-billion-dollar project like landing somebody on Mars, a threshold of being $50 over budget this week doesn't matter for a hill of beans. But, you know, you get the same project where you're, well, 50 probably won't make a difference anyway, but you see what I'm saying. The size and scope and scale of a project will determine appropriate governance goals. And you want to keep things as simple as you can. The more complex it is, the more difficult it is. You know, if you've worked as project managers here at AT&T, you may have been on a project where you had to do this form and that form and this form and that form, and you got repeated stuff out there, and you get problems like, I updated this table, but I didn't update this one. I mean, I have a project now where I fill out a status document for my management, and the project is updating somebody else's application, and they keep saying that they keep freaking out because they keep saying we're in yellow, and I'm like, where are you getting it? The only thing I'm reporting is green to anybody, so I don't know where you're getting this yellow status from, and I still don't know where that is. But they just call me up and ask me, "Are you yellow?" I'm like, "No, we're green." So things like that. It's keeping it simple eliminates those kinds of issues. Getting experienced people to do it. I mean, we want experienced people to do everything, right? I mean, newbies have to come in and they have to learn. So, but yeah, we want experienced people if we can get them. Practice governance on project programs and portfolios. I mean, you know, we have PMOs for all kinds of that kind of governance stuff. Keep the governance process transparent. I mean, everything should be transparent that we do. Somebody asks where that money went, we should be able to tell them right where it went. We don't need to hem and haw. We don't deliver something, we should be able to tell them, hey, we didn't deliver this on time because of this, this, and this. You don't want to sit back and say anything, you know. And as far as the governance process goes, we don't want a secret band of governance people that we go to when we have an issue, when we raise an issue or an escalation point, so that the clients don't see it. We don't want that. We want everything to be transparent to the stakeholders. Real life, that gets difficult at times, but as far as the test goes, you want things to be transparent to all of the project stakeholders. And then this last thing, remember, governance is an evolutionary process and take advantage of the lessons you've learned during it. I don't really know what to say about that. It's self-evident. It's what it is. Any questions on these guidelines for appropriate governance for a project? Okay. We'll skip over this activity for right now. If we have time, we can come back to that. So next we have plan and manage project phase closure. We talked about that transition stuff, or you know, the between phases, and here we are going to be going into that in much more detail here. Determine criteria to successfully close up the project or the phase. We do that at the very beginning of the project. When we talked about scope, we identified our acceptance criteria for things, right? This is what we're talking about, that acceptance criteria. So we should be able to do that. Develop transition planning artifacts. So when we are going from a phase of design to the phase of build, we We need architectural solutions, for IT. For if you're building and construction, maybe that design was an architect, and you have architectural drawings are the artifacts that you have to pass to the builders. Whatever we're doing, we have to have a plan to transition those artifacts to whomever that's going to take over the next phase, or if we're at the end of the project. So we've finished the project, we're going to transition our new product to our client. They may need M&Ps for using it. They may need any number of artifacts to take advantage of what we give them. Validate readiness for transition. Operation team, if we're at the end of the project, we're delivering the completed project, or the next phase. Again, making sure that everybody's ready for us. I mean, if we finish the solution and there's no team ready to start building, then it's not there. Or if we built the product for, say, a call center software for whatever, but they don't have the call center set up yet, and they don't have the people to talk about it when we're done. They're not ready for transition. So we have to make sure that everybody's on the same page and they're ready when we're ready to transition this. Conclude activities to close out the project or the phase, and there's all kinds of activities that we'll be doing, and we'll talk about those as we move along. Any question on these enablers? We'll talk about them more coming up here, but if anybody has any question right now? Okay, so our deliverables and tools, we're going to have a definition of done. This is our acceptance criteria in essence. And then validate the work. We talked about that in the PMBOK, Chapter 5 in scope. We validate scope. This is what we're talking about right here. We're going to validate that work. And here they have no specific tools. I'm not sure why no specific tools here, but definition of done and validating the work. Essentially, definition of done is the acceptance criteria. Validating the work is, did we deliver the definition of done? And closing the project are the phase. They got several important activities occur during closeout. So one of the things we have to do, obviously, is make sure the plan work is complete. The project or phase information is archived. Project team resources are released to pursue other endeavors. So we did the work, we documented the work, and we put it aside for future reference or for whatever. And then you guys, your project team resources are released and ready to go to work on another project. Very simple as far as the activities that occur during closeout. We'll go into more details coming up here. Okay, close project or phase criteria. Any one of the following events can result in closure. And when I had talked earlier, I kind of emphasized that the phase could terminate the project before we're really done. This is where we're going to be kind of getting into that. So the project or phase successfully met its completion objectives. We did what we set out to do. We're finished with it. They accepted it. Hey, we're done. The requirements changed during execution to the point where the project is no longer feasible. We were working on the project. They said, we want this. This you probably see more in Agile, although it's not unheard of in Waterfall. But when you do an Agile, you're delivering, and we have kind of like, they have this much money, and here's the line. We're going to deliver everything above this line. And they keep asking for new stuff, and they keep asking for new stuff, and they push enough stuff below that line that all of a sudden it's no longer feasible. So suddenly execution, we're done. We can't go any further. It's no longer feasible to do this. Adequate funding is no longer available to complete the requirements. I don't know if anybody out here has had their funding yanked from them and they had to end a project early, but I have had that happen a lot. So adequate funding is no longer available. Project's over. You still have to close out though, but that's what happens. Significant risks are encountered that makes the successful completion of the project impossible. So big risks. If you're building a bridge and the cliff side on the other side of where the bridge is going to connect to collapses, all of a sudden that's a big risk. We can't do this now. I mean, it's going to be a lot more work involved, and it's just not possible anymore. Or the organization no longer needs the project deliverables. You know, requirements, or I'm sorry, regulatory requirements vanish, change, and all of a sudden it's like, well, I don't have to do this anymore. Why do we want this? So there's another reason why a project would close. External factors arise that do away with the need for the project. Well, that you know, that organization no longer needs, or I'm sorry, the significant risk might be one of those external factors. Change in laws and regulations, I just talked about that one, those externally, but I mean, this falls into the rest of this too. Internal or external could end this project. Merger or acquisition that affects the organization. So hopefully nobody here got swept up in the whole DirecTV thing, but some of the projects that I was working on in cloud, we no longer have to do because it's now DirecTV's problem and not ours. So kind of went, okay, stop. Global or national economic changes. So again, you know, hey, the people that want it can't afford it anymore. Is an example of an economic change, or the project isn't really viable anymore. It's going to cost too much. People aren't going to use the product because it costs too much to use it now because of changes in the economic environment. Any questions? Just something to keep in mind. Projects don't always end with I delivered successfully what I set out to deliver. Keep that one in mind. Any questions on this one right now? We're just flying through this stuff here. But okay, let's move on. Close procurement. So this actually, I talked about this earlier. This was actually a whole separate business process in PMBOK version 5 and before that. And then in 6, it went away. It became part of just the regular closing stuff. Procurements are closed when contract term of procurement have been satisfied by both the buyer and the seller. So the buyer says, yes, you delivered everything that I wanted, and the seller says, I delivered everything you wanted, and we're all happy, and contract terms are met. So you close out the contract. This can occur throughout the life of the project, not during project closure. So when you finish it, you know, if your contractor is a subcontractor delivering a piece of your project, once they're done, they're done. You can close this out. You don't have to keep working with them, even though you still got months or years left on this project. Contracts are not kept open any longer than necessary to avoid erroneous or unintentional charges against the contract. That's just good business. You know, you leave that contract open. We're all done with it, and then somebody slips a new invoice in. Well, guess what? That just hoses everything up. So you have to, closing it as soon as you can eliminates that as a problem. I guess some people could say on the flip side of that, if you close it before everybody's paid, then you kind of maybe have to open something up to take care of that. But anyway, that's what they want. Any questions on closing procurements? Again, this is all really straightforward stuff here. Acceptance. Acceptance criteria, set of conditions that are required to be met before deliverables are accepted. And this is something we determined way early on. People said, you know, in Agile, we have a user story and we have kind of the general format. As the client, I want this to do this so that I can do this. And the acceptance criteria probably has something to do with so that I can do this. It's, you know, I want it to be able to, I want it to be fast. I want it to be responsive. I want it to be able to collect all the customer's information. I want all the things that I need to have in there. So your acceptance criteria are going to be functional and non-functional type of stuff. And you're going to make sure that they're met. That's one of the things we'll be looking at with that project deliverable. And if it's not defined well up front, you could meet a faulty acceptance criteria and it gets accepted and it really doesn't deliver what the customer wanted. So it's important to make sure that that's correctly identified at the front of the project. These criteria generally refer to some or all of the requirements that were established at the beginning of the project. and which might have been modified during the project's life cycle, which happens too. When, we get out there, especially in Agile, we're working on this and the customers look at this and they're like, you demo it and they're like, oh, you know what? It would really be nice if we could do this. It takes time and it takes money and it could hit their scope, but if it's something that they want, you have new criteria, acceptance criteria, and you work to complete that. Deliverables that meet these acceptance criteria are formally signed off and approved by the customer sponsor. So acceptance, we identified what's acceptable. We demonstrate to them that it is what they asked for and it meets these criteria, and everybody signs off. And so we're all copacetic. The contract has been fulfilled. Any questions on this? Acceptance is pretty simple stuff. I guess it's been really simple stuff in theory here, but in real life it gets complicated. But generally it gets complicated again because acceptance criteria may not have been properly defined, and so there's wiggle room. Without that wiggle room, it usually is pretty cut and dry. Payments to a supplier or vendor made in accordance with the terms of the contract. It's pretty straightforward again. When you finish that contract, you make sure everybody's paid. Unless the contract is closed at the completion of the project or phase, payment will most likely have been made at the time of contract closure. So it's kind of saying the same thing here. If you close at the end of the contract, that's when you pay. If you close before the end of the contract, that's when you pay. So when you close the contract, it's when it's final payments. It should not be delayed until the project or phase closure unless specified in the contract to avoid the potential for accidental charges to the contract. Again, same kind of thing. It should not be delayed unless specified in the contract. Somebody delivers a product, a step in your whole process. So it's like, for me to build this whatchamacallit, I need their thingamajig, but I won't know that their thingamajig works until I finish my whatchamacallit. So maybe you're leaving it open until then. But that would be a specified, an exception that is specified. So any questions on this part, guys? Questions? Okay. Knowledge management, lesson learned repository, a store of historical information about lessons learned in projects. Knowledge management is, it's underrated and at times it's overrated. Lessons learned are essentially, it's 20/20 hindsight for future projects. We learn our lesson and we don't do it again if we learned it. We don't record that lesson learned, well, then we're prone to, especially if it's somebody else who's doing it, you're prone to problems there. So knowledge management during the project or phase closure consists of finalizing the lessons learned register, which is compiled throughout the life cycle of the project. We did Agile, you do what's the word I'm looking for here? Retrospectives. You're collecting all that stuff, what worked, what didn't work on your retrospectives, and you get that, you document that all the time, and then you sum it all up at the end of the project. This document should be added to the lesson learned repository, which is a database of lessons learned from multiple projects. I don't know if we do that here at AT&T. Probably is a good practice though. Some of these lessons learned probably don't apply to certain things, and so if it gets too big, it's probably not very helpful, but something to think about there and something to remember for the test. You should have a database of lessons learned at the end of the project that you add to other lessons learned. All right, transition planning artifacts, coordination and strategy about how to best deliver and transition the product and other deliverables as needed. So between phases, between the end of the project and turning it over to operations. Releasing and deploying deliverables in the most suitable manner ensures end user awareness and increased proper usage and adoption of outputs. Preparation of artifacts include training, documentation, communication, support. All these things kind of have to happen. Okay, I'm going to stop right here for right now. We'll take a break. If anybody has any questions, let me know. I'm actually going to step away here for a moment, get some coffee, and we'll be back at 5:53. Okay, 10 minutes. Okay, I'm back. So, anybody have any questions while we're waiting here?
Hey, Matt,
Hey,
I
Matt.
just have a, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Matt, I just had a general question about the wiki site and the PowerPoints. I know that every class we have someone ask about when that's going to be updated. Is Brian the only person that can add those slides to the wiki site? I was just curious to see if someone can maybe do it in his absence.
I don't know if he is the only person who can do that, but I am unfortunately not one of those people who can do that. But you guys should all actually have the slides. I think I sent those out to everybody. Did you? I sent it to the PowerPoints. Yeah, I thought I sent that. Maybe I didn't send PowerPoint. I'm pretty sure I did, but I know I sent the spreadsheet to everybody. I was thinking the PowerPoints were with that, but I might not have. I sent the spreadsheet to everybody. And you guys, these are, if you look at the spreadsheet, it does have the material that's going to be the topics that are going to be covered in there in that spreadsheet. So you can look those up. You guys should all have the big
we have the
PowerPoints.
information. Yeah, in the student bundle, I think it is a little bit easier to review on the PowerPoints that you all have. But I know, of course, that we have the same information, but it's just a really large, long PDF file that it is. Yeah. It would be cleaner to be able to review the PowerPoint. But
and I wish I could help you on that. I don't know what the deal is, but I prepared these things and I gave them to Brian, and that's kind of, and then I teach him on occasion. So it's kind of out of my hands on that. I did pass that stuff along to Brian, but I don't know. I think the problem is that Brian's name is on all of this training material. So I think he wants to keep keep things from getting out of hand and then possibly endangering the program because, I don't know, somebody got a copy of it that shouldn't have got a copy or something like that. I don't know how that works, but I'm not sure exactly why, but that's the way it is. And, Brian's really normally on top of things. I know he was on vacation, which kind of left the people in a lurch, but I don't know that they're going to have much change in that process, but I'll be talking to him shortly, so we'll see. Okay. Somebody else had a question?
I got one. Yeah, I have a question. This is Angie Rose. I'm having trouble getting in on the WebEx, so I've been on the phone, but I just want to make sure I get credit for the class because I've still been trying to get on, and something's going on with my computer, and I'm not able to.
Okay. Yeah, just do me a favor and cue me, ML2674. And
I'm sorry,
just let me know. It's M is in Matt, L is in LaDuca, 2674. Just cue me, and I'm not going to change it. If you don't get credit, you'll need to go out and update the roster. But Brian's not going to get it updated for probably a few days here. Normally I think it's 10 days, and that way when you update the roster, it'll send it to me, and I'll say, yeah, I remember because I got your cue here. I'll probably remember anyway, but just send me a cue just in case.
Okay, thanks so much.
Okay, somebody else had a question out there. I heard a man's voice.
Yeah, Matt, I just had a question going back to just the material you've covered so far with governance. Would governance kind of be the same as a standard? And I'm just going to, the definition that PMBOK gives of a standard is just a document established by an authority used as a model. Would that be like the same as a governance?
Well, I mean, governance standardizes your stuff. I don't know if I would call governance a standard. I mean, I guess the output of governance, it should be considered your standard. If they say, well, when you do this, all your projects have to go into, like here at AT&T, it would be, governance might say all your stuff has to go into PRISM so that we can track the funding and we can track this and we can track that. Governance told you have to do that. And that's a standard for the projects that fall into that governance thing. the governing body, I wouldn't call it as a standard, but I mean, some of the stuff that comes out of there might be the standards that you need to follow. You know, that would be kind of like OPAs is essentially what governance is. It's the organizational process assets that are telling you how they want you to do things, generally speaking. And then anything that doesn't fall into there, that's kind of your purview where you get to project manage, I guess is the best way to say that. But yeah, I mean, OPAs are going to tell you a lot of this stuff. You got to use PowerPoint. You got to use Excel. You got to use Smartsheets. You got to use PMBOK. You got to use Microsoft Office. You got to use Microsoft Project. You got to use this, that, whatever. Governance is going to tell you all that. They're going to tell you your thresholds. You know, I don't want to find out that we're $50 million over budget, you know, 10 weeks late, you know. I want to know now when it's that big of money or whatever, you know, your thresholds on how far over budget you are and how long you've been over budget and all those kinds of things. They'll lay those things out for you, and that'll go into your project plan, you know, whether it's your cost plan or your cost management plan or your schedule management plan or whatever. Governance will tell you how to fill those things out or help you tell you, you know, dictate how you're supposed to fill them out. Some governing bodies are lax, and they leave most of those details up to you. And some of them are very, very, very strict, and they will tell you how to do everything. So if you're working in like the defense industry, I mean, they have very strict requirements because of security clearances and things like that. So there's going to be a lot of stuff that you have to do. You know, you got your ISO 9000 stuff and, you know, all those ISO rules you got to follow. And so it kind of depends. But yeah, I wouldn't call governance a standard, but the stuff that comes out of the governance might be your standard that you're operating with. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Yep. We got another minute before we start cranking along again here. Does anybody have any other questions? Questions. All righty. Well, you get less than a minute to sit back and relax. Let everybody had a chance to get some coffee, take a health break, do whatever you need to do. I probably need less coffee. I feel like I'm talking a million miles a minute here today. Okay, there we go. We are at time, 10 minutes. Okay, so anybody have any transition planning artifact questions? I mean, essentially transition planning artifacts, training, documentation, communication, support. We just essentially, when we pass it on to folks, we want to tell them how to support it, how to communicate with it or with folks that are, you know, that are going to support it, documentation for everything under the sun and training, how to use it, you know. Okay, let's kind of move on here then. Oh, we have a question there? Nope, yes, okay. Transition readiness, releasing, delivering, deploying the project work into an environment that is not ready may negate its value. So if you're not ready to use it, I mean, I don't want to say it negates its value, but it's you know, it's like putting a down payment on a car that you're not going to buy for the next for another 5 years. You delivered something and it's not useful to you, essentially. Project teams must examine the readiness of all parties and prepare them for delivery, including end users, the business, physical resources, and the project team. So when you're ready to go, you have to have the end users ready to go. They have to be up to speed on how it's going to operate, what they have to do with it, how they will use it, blah, 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 how they're going to read, who they reach out to. The business has to know, you know, if it's a new product if this is supporting a new product, the business has to know that it's ready because they're going to release a product out there, and if the call center software is not up to speed yet, that they don't know. Or if it is up to speed and they're sitting around waiting for you to tell them, then they're really delaying a release of a product because they don't know that yours is ready. The physical resources, the people who are going to be using it need to, I mean, you need to have, like if it's software, you have to have the servers, probably you have that already. So all that stuff has to be in place. If it's construction, it's the same kind of thing. And the project team needs to be aware too that everything is ready to go. They're going to have to transition it. They have to be ready to transition it over. Most critical in situations where there's an upgrade or improvement to an existing product or service. So again, we're upgrading, everybody needs to be ready to go, because if you have a product that's down for this upgrade or this improvement, then maybe you're actually halting business that was in progress. Assess the readiness of all parties, implement the transition plans accordingly, and capture lessons learned for the next release or project. Same stuff we just talked about. You know, make sure everybody's ready to go. Make sure you have plans in place. Capture your lessons learned for the next release or project. Any questions on transition readiness? Just making sure everybody's ready for when you're done. Okay, lesson learned register. Project document used to record knowledge gained during a project so that it can be used in the current project and entered in the lessons learned repository. Not just so that it can be used in the current project, but hopefully that you can use it in other things too. Considering scheduling lessons learned, you know, hey, like right now I work with folks in Tel Aviv, and they just had a week-long Passover. Scheduling would have been nice to, actually we did get a heads up on that, so that wasn't really, I wouldn't call it a lesson learned, but if you didn't, that would be a problem. It's something to keep in mind next Passover or whenever. Conflict management lessons learned, you know, hey, dealing with these people, and not just conflict on your team, but with customers, things like that. Nice, then there's lessons learned there. If you're dealing with a customer who's, what's the word I'm looking for? Can't be satisfied here. You know, they just are going to complain about everything under the sun, and they're going to fight everything tooth and nail. They're going to complain about every dime you spend. Be nice to document all that for the next time you have to deal with those folks. Seller lessons learned. If you're buying something from somebody, if you're actually a project manager and you have a third party coming in, and you're you have to deal with that seller, kind of along the lines of the conflict management thing. Customer lessons learned. What do we deal with the customers? You know, how did we deal with them? Did we learn something when dealing with them? Strategic lessons learned. Hey, did we hit a decision point, and strategically we should have killed it. It should have been a kill point as opposed to moving on, and we didn't. Tactical lessons learned. You know, things more immediate, not necessarily strategic. Any other aspects of lessons learned? So we can learn lessons about everything under the sun. I'm sure there's probably a million different things that, you know, this is just a small list of stuff to consider with lessons learned. Any question on this? Lessons learned. We do those retrospectives. That's kind of within our team. But we also have other things as well. We have retrospectives with our clients and things as well. Any questions on lessons learned? This is one of those OPAs that'll be out there for you guys. Closeout meeting, session held at the end of the project or the phase. Big surprise there. It involves discussing the work, reviewing the lessons learned, includes stakeholders, team members, project resources, and customers. This is not a requirement that you have to do. This is a guideline for when you have closeout meetings. So if you do that, if your contract requires it, or if your company requires it, and you have to have these things, these are the kinds of things you'll be looking at. You'll be discussing the work. Hey, we got this, we did this, and you know, you might be talking about, you know, God knows what you'll be talking about with that. Reviewing your lessons learned. Hey, we did this just fine. Next time you hire somebody, you might want to think about this, and this, or whatever. You know, lessons learned for everybody out there. And you're in of course, you got to include stakeholders. Team members are stakeholders as well as our project resources and customers, right? So, yeah, essentially stakeholders. The rest of those are redundant there. All those people are our stakeholders, and we want to make sure they're involved and they have their feedback. Any question on closeout meetings? Retrospective. The closeout meeting in an Agile project is called a retrospective. We just talked about that. It includes the Agile team, the product owner, key stakeholders. So we're going to sit back and we're going to encourage the participants to review what went well and what didn't go so well, what could have been done better. This assessment includes the work on the project and also processes, the level of collaboration inside and outside of the Agile team and other areas that influence the effectiveness of product delivery, which we kind of talked about, all those things that we got to consider. Some of it's inside the team, some of it's outside the team. Processes, you know, hey, this is great, except for I'm, you know, in my example, you know, I'm filling out my governance stuff says I have to put all this stuff in smart sheets and update all my status there. And yet my client kept seeing a yellow Jeopardy somewhere. There's a problem with the process. I documented that, and they just come to me and ask me my status now instead of going to the other document that still has us in yellow for some reason. But, you know, those are things that you'll see out there. Those are all the kinds of stuff that will come up in retrospectives, and you'll document all of those, and you'll sum those all up in a nice little bundle. Any question about retrospectives in Agile? Oh, we're just flying through the stuff. Guidelines to close a project or a phase. Review the project management plan. Oh, this is what we created at the beginning. Part of that project management plan was scope management plan, your cost management plan, your schedule management plan, your risk management plan, your quality management plans. We have all those management plans that become part of your project management plan. If applicable, use a project termination checklist. So, you know, and that's always can be applicable. You know, hey, we're ending this project either because we delivered what we were supposed to deliver, or because we got our funding yanked, or because it wasn't needed anymore, or whatever. You get a checklist, you go through, I paid off the contractors, we closed out that procurement contract, we did this, we did this, we did this, we did all of the things. Having a checklist is just, all I can say is having a checklist is great. I use them all the time. And using a project termination checklist is just one more thing that's really nice to have, to make sure that, you know, somebody doesn't come back, you know, 6 months later and say, well, you know, I charged to this project because somebody didn't close it properly, you know, so that's one of those things. Gather and organize performance measurement documentation, product documentation, and other relevant project records. These are good to have. I don't necessarily want to say it's part of the lessons learned, but it's nice to know for future reference. When we talked about estimating early on, you guys talked about, we talked about analogous estimate and parametric estimates. I mentioned that a lot out there because you'll probably see those on test. But in order to have an analogous estimate, first thing you got to have is something to compare it to, right? You got to say, yeah, this project is just like that other one. But if you don't have performance measurements, project documentation, and other relevant stuff, you have nothing to compare. So you can't really, you know, you can't say, well, we're doing the same kind of thing as they did, and they were over budget here, so maybe we need to add more money, kind of thing. So gathering all that stuff up is really important. And it's nice to have all that stuff up in one nice, neat little package. And it's nice to have that documented as you go along, as opposed to waiting until the end of the project here and do this. So when they're saying gather and organize performance measurement stuff, you probably should have this stuff. You should be collecting this stuff all along the way. Confirm product meets compliance requirements. Again, this is probably should have been part of your acceptance criteria. So, you know, I mean, if it doesn't meet compliance requirements, then it should not have ever been accepted, right? So I don't know if this really, I mean, you can certainly do this here, but it should have been handled before when we verified scope. Release project resources. So we're done, and now everybody can go out and celebrate and go to work on a project they want to do. So you have to make sure you release your project resources, update records, ensure that they reflect final specifications. Again, so the record should, you know, this is beyond the acceptance criteria. You want to make sure that all the records show that, hey, we've got acceptance on everything, and this is now what the new specs are, how they change from whenever. Be sure to update the resource pool database to reflect new skills and increased level of proficiency. That one I'm a little, I guess some places do that, but you know, generally speaking here at AT&T and IT, people self-report, so you know they update these things as they see fit. I guess if you're working in a company that has a stricter guidelines on that, certainly that's there. That's not something you'll be doing after every project here, probably at AT&T, and it might be something that you need to do for another company. So please make sure you don't ignore that just because we don't do it here at AT&T. Analyze project success and effectiveness and document lessons learned. Well, how many times have we already said we're documenting lessons learned? So we're already doing that. And analyze the project success and effectiveness. We don't necessarily do that all the time either. I mean, if we did performance testing, we might already have done that. If we didn't do performance testing, or we didn't need to do performance testing, or it wasn't part of our acceptance criteria, coming back to the project to check its success and effectiveness might not be in the budget, I guess. So again, that's one of those things we probably don't necessarily do here all the time, but maybe you probably should know that. Prepare lessons learned reports on a final project report. I mean, we've been documenting lessons learned, and we've been talking about that. Having a report at the end is just kind of like one final redundancy here. However, they do ask these questions on that question on the in the handbook. I think you guys probably see that there. So prepare lessons learned report and a final project report. I don't necessarily do that. I mean, my final status probably falls into that category, at least for the final project report. And then my lessons learned are, I don't know, I just don't put them in a report format. They go into my lessons learned. Obtain project approval and formal project acceptance. That would, we sort of did that along the way, but at the very end, you want to get your final project acceptance. I mean, we've been getting acceptance on everything that we've delivered up until this point, and then one last final, hey, yep, it's all here, let's ready to go. Archive a complete set of indexed project records. Again, we archived our project record stuff, but I don't know about indexed. But anyway, that's one of the things I have here. Make sure you know that. Celebrate the success of the project with the team and other stakeholders. That might not seem like a big deal here. And as far as I'm concerned at AT&T, it's never been that big a deal. I mean, we've been able to get something accomplished like that in the past, but it's going to be a big deal probably on the exam. That's an Agile thing. Celebrate success and the emphasis they put on that. In Agile, that's just probably a really important one to remember on the exam when you're done. Celebrate your success of the project with the team and other stakeholders. So I would not ignore that one, even as fluffy as that may sound. Okay, we are really kind of wrapping things up here. So we have a couple activities here. Well, let's come back to those first. So our learning goals, this is kind of the whole starting the project thing, not just for this class today. Assess the project needs, complexity, magnitude to determine the appropriate and project methodology, methods, and practices. You guys should have had all that stuff already. One of the things they didn't really talk about here, I don't see on here, is that whole team building thing. Creating your team and getting that team up to scope. That was also there, and I would remember that even though it's not on this page. Plan and manage the scope. You guys all should have talked about plan and manage scope. Scope is really important, that whole, you know, getting from your charter to decomposing your high-level requirements into a work breakdown structure. Those are really, really important topics. So scope, you know, remember that charter, remember the decomposing to a work breakdown structure. Those are really important, and you'll probably get lots of questions on the exam about that. Plan and manage the budget and resources. That's a really important stuff as well. You should be paying attention to all of that. You know, your estimating techniques, make sure you know those kinds of things. Tracking all of your resources and how you do your budget. You know, are you rolling things up into you know, kind of a bottom-up estimate? How are you doing those kinds of things? Plan, prepare, modify, manage the project schedule based on methodology. We talked about that. I actually taught you guys that class. So we had talked about a lot of things on that project schedule. We talked about the critical path method. We talked about all of that stuff as far as the schedule goes. We talked about, well, lead time and lag time a little bit. We talked about float. We talked about how we do that, where it's finished to start. Make sure you guys have that stuff down. You'll have another class on that. Chris and Cindy are going to teach that, I think Wednesday actually. Plan and manage the quality of products and deliverables. I guess you guys talked about that. But make sure you've got that down. Make sure you know the difference between quantitative and qualitative quality stuff. Integrate project planning activities. That was all that Chapter 4 stuff from the PMBOK. You guys should have all of that out there. Plan and manage procurement strategy. We talked a little bit about closing procurement. I imagine you guys already talked about the procurement strategy, the plan and managing that procurement strategy. Did you guys talk about contracts, you know, like fixed bid and time and material contracts? When you talked about procurement? If not, you guys will get to that. Oh, you did talk about that. So make sure you know where. Oh, that's good. So make sure you know where the risk lies when you're talking about that kind of stuff. You know, time and materials. The buyer accepts the risk. Fixed bid, it's the risk is on the seller kind of thing, and then everything else is just shades of those two. Establish the project governance structure. We just talked about that today. A lot of that is what's the word I'm looking for here? It's out of your hands. As a project manager, governance comes down to you and says, this is the way you're doing things. So as a project manager, you need to know what you know, where it's coming from. But you probably aren't going to be setting these governance things in a project. You might be doing it in a program. You might be setting them for the projects, and for the, you know, maybe for the portfolio, might be setting it for the programs. Plan and manage project phase closure. We just talked about that. So this is kind of the high level of the project. Okay. Oh, why do you think developing, I don't know. Let me ask you a question now. Anybody, why do you think developing project and scope management plans important? Anybody have any guesses here? No right answer. Well, there's right answers, but there's definitely wrong answers on this. But anybody want to field why we want a scope management plan? Did you guys talk about gold plating at all?
Yeah, we should never do it.
You should never do gold plating. Scope management. We don't want to deliver more than what we're asked to deliver. We also don't want to deliver less than what we're being asked to deliver. So scope management essentially helps us deliver the scope and only the scope. We have different things that we do in there. One of the things that we do is we're looking, when we do the scope management stuff, one of the things we talked about was, trying to think what's the word here. When we're talking about our scope management, we do the work breakdown structure. So we decompose big stuff down into little stuff, and we have the RTM, the traceability matrix, requirements traceability matrix. I don't know if you guys mentioned that before. We want to make sure that we're delivering everything. So we want to track, hey, we had these requirements at the beginning, and we got it tracked it all the way through the design stuff, all the way down to, yes, here it is. We tested it, and this one works. And we want to know who's responsible for everything along the way. That's our scope management stuff there. We want to make sure that we deliver the scope, and only the scope, and nothing but the scope. And for the project management plan, it's kind of all the rest of that. We want to set baselines so we have a target. Otherwise, we just wander aimlessly. We don't have a map. We go over budget. We don't know we're over budget because we didn't have a baseline, right? Same thing for our schedule. Why you think it's important to collect requirements, define scope? Oh, well, we just talked about that, right? It's kind of the same thing. Why we want to do this stuff, collecting those requirements. We want to know what we're delivering, or at the end of the day, the project will never end because they said, oh, you know what, we also need this. Oh, you know what, we also need this. Oh, you know what, we also need this. You don't get that defined up front, well, there, you know, that's the problem, and that's those requirements in the scope. And then that work breakdown structure, it helps us to estimate, it helps us to track what we're doing, because, you know, somebody says, I want you to build the Empire State Building. If your your single package is it's completed, well, how do you track that? How far along are we? You know, it's a whole lot easier to say, hey, we poured the foundation today, you know, bada bing, we're done with that part. We know we finished that particular task, and we know we have these many more tasks to do along the way. Okay, we have lots and lots of time left here. Does anybody have any questions about any of the stuff in the starting the project? Tell you what, here we can do this. Hold on, first of all, let me make sure that I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment here. I did this the other day, and let me, Jesse, I'm gonna change your role so you are no longer a co-host. Oh, dang it, keeps making other people co-host. I think you're all co-host. Okay, I was gonna tell you, well, I'm gonna, if you guys wanna leave, you can, but when you check out of the room, do not end the meeting, just leave the meeting. Last time that happened and somebody ended the call, and I don't really want to go back. Well, how about this? Just don't hang up. Anybody have questions? If you want to walk away from it, but please just do not end the meeting. And then I'm here for questions if you want to stick around and ask questions. Of course, does nobody want to ask questions? You guys are done with that first module, and nobody had any questions about that, starting the project? Well, we can call it if you guys want then. We're kind of early here, but I don't want to hold you if you don't have anything else here. Okay, well, I'm going to stay on the line here as long as nobody ends the meeting when you check out here. So if you want to go ahead and leave, please leave the meeting. Don't close it. Don't end it.
Hey, Matt, I have a couple of questions
Okay.
in relation to the exam and material we talked about tonight, actually. Just
hold on a second here.
Yeah.
We're getting beeps here. Let me see if I can cancel them beeps out. I don't know if I can do that or not. Okay, well, go ahead. The beep stopped.
So I assume there's still, I know you guys have said there's been a lot of changes to the exam, but I am still assuming that you're still going to have to know how to, you know, do the EAC, the BAC, and the CPI, do all the formulas and all that great stuff, right?
That would be my guess. Some of the material, some of that is out there. You're actually going to get some of that Wednesday, I think. Chris and Cindy, I think it's Wednesday's class, and then you'll get some more in here. But yeah, you should know the EAC, the BAC, the SPI, CPI. They talk about it. They don't go in nearly as much detail. But earned value management is really important. In general, I don't see them eliminating that.
Right. So the reason I ask is my brother took the exam, I don't know, 2 years ago. And he was telling me, you know, he had to know how to do, you know, ETC. And they gave him a question. And I don't know what the question was. But he said, you know, there's 5 breakdown steps. And there are, you know, I have a whole rhythm kind of thing that I've been memorizing on how to make sure I have all the formulas down. So, you know, it's just kind of, I'm just curious to make sure. I mean, with Agile edition and everything, is there? I don't know. I mean, are they still going to ask about key competencies, and are they going to still do? They're building a house, and you have, 60% complete of it, and there's, the costs in the day, and still you still have to know how to figure that all out, right?
You probably are going to have to learn some of that. Again, I don't, I was actually going over this with Chris and Cindy because they're going to be teaching that material kind of as a separate deck. The earned value management, you're still going to need to know those things like estimate to completion. An estimate to completion, there's several ways to calculate things, and the formulas themselves are not necessarily the hard part. Although if you have trouble memorizing formulas, they could be the hard part. But more importantly, it's why you use the formula that you use.
Right.
Because, for estimate to completion, there's a couple ways to do that. One way is using CPI. So like, for instance, if you're, and I use this example, and I use this on the slide deck that you guys will be going over with Chris and Cindy, you're laying out concrete, you're pouring concrete walkway, and you hit rain. You got a rain delay for a day. Your estimate, you're over budget now because you had people waiting around, and you ended up putting tarps over to protect things, and you kind of did that. So it was a one-time cost, and so your estimate to completion, you're probably just going to add that overrun now to what you normally would expect to do. Whereas if you have, like, people are working and a contract gets ratified and these guys all get a 10% raise, well, that's going to affect the whole rest of the project. So now you're going to have to base it on CPI as opposed to basing it on a one-time issue. So you'll use the CPI formula for estimate to completion as opposed to, a one-time thing.
Right.
Okay. So those kinds of things, you'll need to know why you use what you use. And they're not that complicated. You'll need to know that SPI less than 1 is bad. SPI greater than 1 is good, I guess. Actually, any kind of, my take on it is any kind of variance.
Yeah.
And any SPI or CPI that is not 1 is bad. If you have a positive variance, it's like, hey, we're $5,000 under budget. Well, that's $5,000 that somebody did a bad job of estimating on because you should have been right on the money. In my book, it's bad, but in their book, it's good. Good. Positive variances are good. Negative variances are bad.
Okay.
But for me, it's like, well, you know what? You guys did a real poor job of estimating, and now we're flush with money that we don't really need and nobody else can use because we took it because we thought we needed it. So it's those kinds of things. And when I say it's bad, it's not horrible. It's certainly the worst of variances. If you say I got a $1 million variance on a $100,000 project, well, that's you could have done 10 projects for that kind of money that you set aside for this one. Right. So that's it depends. But when you do those, we'll go over that and we'll talk about those. I don't want to get into it too much because it's coming up material and we haven't really covered it yet. But you'll be tested on some of it. I will say that for earned value management, and if you look in the PIM Box 6 where they talk about earned value management, they have an emerging trends and they talk about almost a whole new direction. We use the earned value for a lot of stuff, and we use it for our, we have planned value, and we have earned value, and we use earned value to calculate cost and time. And then we have actual cost, and they're talking about actual schedule now too, but that didn't materialize this time. I mean, that was kind of, they called it the emerging trend, and they didn't get there. So it's pretty much the same as it was before. There was really complex formulas for calculating ETC and stuff, and it never showed up on my test. But you do need to know, like, the CPI one and the one-time problem kind of thing.
Okay.
So,
and then are they going to do straightforward questions still?
I have no idea. No, let me rephrase that. No, they won't be doing necessarily straightforward questions. They weren't straightforward before, though. there's some of the situational ones are very complex questions, and you really got to have a good grasp of what they're asking for and what they're looking for as far as the answer goes. It will no longer be just A, B, C, or D. So a lot of people have a strategy of I'm going to eliminate. I know it's not A and I know it's not B, so it's either C or D. And then you can see if you can eliminate one of those two by other means. Without necessarily knowing the correct answer, you know enough to say that all these other ones aren't the correct answer, so this must be it. And there's a strategy to those kinds of questions, but they're supposed to be matching questions, and I don't know what they meant by short answers. I can't imagine that it's typing out an answer because that makes a grading a pain in the ass. So
Right.
I don't really know how those questions are going to look moving forward. I haven't taken the test in the new format. I don't know. I haven't talked to anybody who's taken it yet even. I'm trying to find somebody who has and see if I get feedback from them, but I don't have any of that right now.
So,
Answer your questions on that so far the best I can anyway.
Because, I just want to make sure that, when we talk about like transference of something, they ask a question about, I don't know, your buddy on the project.
When you say, wait, when you say transference, are you talking about risk?
Yes.
Transferring risk? Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead. So what was your question?
So he had a question on his test, and, it was, he said something about a project, a decision was made to buy the insurance. What is it? Transference. It was, so it's, I'm just kind of, memorizing, what all these things mean. And I'm just trying to get a hold of how they're going to ask the question. But if it's
and it probably won't be just simple as that. They might, like buying a bond, making somebody get bonded for something.
Right.
That's transference. And there's other things that kind of complicate and muddy the waters when you talk about risk mitigation stuff, or I don't want to call it risk mitigation because mitigation is obviously one of the possibilities that you can do, but your risk responses, things get complicated, because they talk about insurance and that really does kind of transfer the risk.
Okay.
Having a third party do the work for you can kind of be considered that, but there are other ways where that might not be considered necessarily transference. So on the test, the answers, the answer was there. You could look at that and say, yes, there's a definite, you go back and look at the book, you can see where this falls into this particular category. I don't think any answer was ambiguous after the fact. So,
Gotcha. All right. I figure we have time. I figured just ask those kind of questions.
No, that's fine. So does anybody else have any other questions you want to ask? Again, I can't tell you about the next test because I don't know that much, except for that it's going to be multiple formats for the questions.
You had said something previously. So when I took the Cisco exam, you had to do a matching type of a thing. It was like definition match type of thing. I didn't know if they were incorporating that kind of stuff into it or not.
Well, I think that they're going to have those kinds of things, and there's strategies for those kinds of questions too. It's like, well, hey, this one I know. You go through the matching thing and you match all the ones that you definitely know, and then you got a list of other ones, and then maybe you can eliminate some of those, and eventually, maybe you're done. Sometimes it's like a Sudoku thing. Well, I can't really answer that, but I can tell that it's not this and this, so I can say this must be it, this guy. And, you don't want to spend too much time on that kind of thing, though. Those kinds of analysis eats up the clock.
Right.
So, and you guys have a very limited clock. So, I would love to tell you a good strategy, but, first of all, other people are different learners, and they have different. Sometimes it's easier to do things one way than the other way. And, you'll hear 1,000 different strategies on taking the test, and they're all going to boil down to probably 3 or 4 different strategies in the end. But that's going into this is important. Make sure you have a real good grasp on how you want to approach it. And unfortunately, we can't tell you what the test looks like to tell you how to prepare everything. But hopefully, you guys won't be walking in completely blind. If you have all this knowledge and you understand how things work, you should be good.
Are we going to be able to put a calculator in?
I don't think so. When I took my exam, the computer that you took the test on had a calculator built in, but they said if you want a calculator, you can use one of ours.
Okay.
If you want one that's not part of that. Now I don't know how that will be. That was Prometric here in St. Louis. I've heard different places do things differently, not necessarily about a calculator, but like creating our little brain dumps.
Yeah.
They changed it from when I took it to some people were saying where they were at, they actually didn't get paper for the brain dump. They had a dry erase board.
Oh.
So you only had so much space you could erase stuff, but if you're going to do brain dump, you got to fill up one part of your board. And then the question is I don't know how, can other people see your board? I don't know how many people Prometric test all kinds of different tests. So, but if there's somebody there doing a PMI thing, maybe they're cheating and looking at your dry erase board. So I don't know how they all do it. I've heard those things. My experience is when we sat down at the keyboard, you had 15 minutes to learn how to navigate it. And so that 15 minutes, that's when you did your brain dump, because it took you 2 seconds to learn how to navigate the test. But then they changed it so you couldn't use that 15 minutes for that. So that was pretty much across the board, I think. And then of course I heard the whiteboard thing and all kinds of other stuff too. So.
All right, thanks.
But then your paperwork, you don't get to keep it. So all your brain dump, all your scrap paper gets thrown away. You can't leave with it. So
Right.
Just so you know. Okay. Any other questions? We still got 28 minutes left here. Anybody have any other questions they want to ask about the material? About?
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Are we going to receive the PowerPoint presentations? Because I mean in the wiki there is only like presentations.
Are we talking about the wiki? The presentations in the wiki? We talked about this a little earlier. You might not have caught that. We talked about that on the break. Brian does that, and I do not have any control over any of that. I'm going to see him. I'll talk to him about it. But you can. I sent out the spreadsheet with what material is actually covered. So you guys do have, for the time being, you actually have the whole starting the project PowerPoint, which is, A through H, I think, and that spreadsheet that I gave you guys that I sent out, I sent it out to the whole distribution. If you didn't get it, let me know. But that will tell you which topics we're covering on which days, so you can look at that. You'll just have to, you'll have to look at those particular topics individually there. But they're all in the bundle. You guys should be able to see every slide that we present in the bundle on your PMI portal thing. Does that help?
Yes, thanks.
Oh, okay. Any other questions? I'm more than happy to answer questions. Everybody's working on your brain dump. I should pop that in. I always ask people that. Brain dump was like massively important to me. I didn't use it nearly so much, but it was preparing my brain dump helped prepare me for the exam. I spent so much time on my brain dump that I didn't have to reference it too much. But there were questions, and like earned value management, I thought I had those formulas down like crazy. And when I went and I did my brain dump, I wrote them down. And when I saw the first question on that I had to use a formula, it was like, I couldn't remember what it was. I went and checked my brain dump. There it was. And, because under the stress of the question, you forget. And as soon as, but if you write it down before you get to that point, you just write all those formulas down, you write all that other stuff down. Then, when you get to the question, you're stressed out, but you wrote it down when you weren't stressed over the question. So it's nice to have that. And if you guys aren't doing your brain dumps yet, you should start on that right now. I recommend you spend 30 minutes every day writing your brain dump, rewriting your brain dump, rewriting your brain dump. You know, try to write it down from memory, then compare it to what you know. You know, you can use, then go back and use your reference material and make sure you get the stuff that you need on there. And eventually, by the end of this thing, you probably have taken stuff off of your brain dump because you've committed it to memory because you've written it down every day for the life of this course. And, you know, but brain dump, brain dump, brain dump. If you haven't started doing one tonight, go write down everything you could think about that you're probably going to see on the test, and then go back and look at your notes and, you know, try to get as much as you can at 30 minutes and see what you got, and then start, you know, then you can start trimming it down to 15 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever. Probably you're going to spend 15 minutes writing it down before the exam, but anyway. Any other questions? Any other comments, concerns that don't have to do with the wiki, because I don't have anything to say about, I can't do anything about that. Everybody's feeling good about the material that you looked at? Critical path stuff we talked about. Everybody knows what a WBS is? Oh, let's try that. If you don't know what a WBS is, you need to learn that because you'll get a question on the exam. I guarantee 100% you'll see a WBS question, what a WBS is. Does everybody know what the charter is? I can guarantee you'll see a question on the charter as well.
Hey, Matt, on the next session, are we going to have any kind of refresher on critical path and calculating, you know, late start, early finish, late finish?
Yeah,
Could
there's
you run through that.
Yeah, we can. Here, hold on a second here. I'm gonna. Where did we get that at? Let me share my screen again real fast. Though.
Yeah, and other people probably know this, but when I was stuck on calculating those numbers, there's a couple of good. Well, it's probably more than a couple, but I found a couple of good videos on Google that explained it. I mean, on I'm sorry, on YouTube that explained all that.
Yeah, they're out there. There's everything under the sun out there. When we do the critical path, so we have this stuff to go over this with you guys. Yeah. And then we have a more complex version of that here when we get down to the end. So it's, you know, they'll walk you through this whole thing. And this one here, this is kind of what you saw on the exam, except for you didn't have all the pictures. But you would have this question, you'd have this thing right here. And then you kind of had to do this on paper and then calculate it all out. And then later exams, I've heard people, they didn't even have this chart. It was all in kind of like a paragraph format. And then so you ended up creating this chart, and then you created this, and then you went through your critical path. So you started at 0, you know, you got your durations, you put all your durations in, then you start moving forward here. So, you know, your forward pass is always really simple until you start converging. So, you know, like B and H here, you know, you got to take the higher number of the two, and then when you get over here to I, 20 and 21, you're going to take the lower, I mean, you're going to take the higher of the two, and then you'll do your backward pass from there. So you take that 30 down, subtract 9, 21, that kind of stuff. They'll walk you through all this stuff here, and they'll talk about the critical path, what is the critical path, and then this one here, you can see where your critical path is. It's A, C, E, G, and I. You do that when you did you could calculate this out without just going through the forward pass. I mean, you know, doing the backward pass, it's harder to tell, but in here, I don't know how they knew that these were 0 because you can't really tell what they are yet until you get your late finish time. But even without the zeros, you can add up your pass. 7 plus 8 plus 5 plus 1 plus 9 gave you 30. Then you got 7 plus 2 plus 3 plus 6 plus 9 gives you something less than 30. And 7 plus 2 plus 5 plus 6 plus 9 gives you something less than 30. So this is the longest path through, which was 30. And I'm just guessing that those add up that way because that's what it's got there. But you can calculate that right out of the gate. And then how long is the critical path? It's 30. We knew that right up because we counted that all up. And then you'll have to, total float, total float, you'll be able to calculate total float from when you finish your backwards pass RD, your total float is 1, right? It's 10 minus the 9. And then when they talk about the free float on activity B here, so B, it's 14 minus the 12 is 2. But we talk about that stuff, so you can see all your answers right there. And we got that in there. They'll go over all of that plus the earned value management. Whoever was asking those questions before, we talked about earned value management, and we got formulas here, so you can calculate that stuff out. And here, we talked about the.
Oh, this is next week's presentation? Okay.
I think so.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for asking that. I was thinking. Yeah. Well, I must have been asleep at this one, so I've been told that.
Yeah, it was. It was actually going to be. It was going to be a review after you actually covered the material, but because of the way things were set up earlier, and we didn't want to change the schedule with people, with the instructors, so it's kind of, you'll get it now, and then you'll get it again later. But like, like this formula up here, the EAC equals the AC plus BAC minus earned value divided by CPI. This one never showed up on my exam. This is a very complex one, and you don't really normally use it so much, but like in this example here, it's when cost is more important than time or vice versa, then you might use this formula. Like for instance, if, hey, you're behind schedule, which is more important, your budget or your schedule, and maybe you'll use these formulas to help you calculate it one way or the other. So so we talked about that, whether it's a one-time anomaly or whether it's a regular occurrent problem. It's going to happen every week, because like say labor rates went up. My estimate was at $50 an hour, and now they're working at $100 an hour. It's being charged $50 an hour for everybody that's working on this more. So you guys will see those next week. So they're there.
When are they going to send this to us, or is that on there and I just missed it?
I don't know if they sent it out or not, but I'll make sure you guys get this.
Oh, awesome! Thank you.
But they're going to go over it with you guys in the review. So, and I'm actually going to be on that class too, because Chris and Cindy are not used to teaching this material, so I'll be there as well. So that material will be out there, and so that those are things you probably want to get on your brain dump. And once you understand the concept of what's happening, all this stuff falls in a lot simpler, and that's why I kind of like to use as many analogies as I can, so you can get a grasp, but associate with something that you already know, and it's easier to remember. It's easier to remember that we're going to use CPI when we have a reoccurring problem with the budget. It's really using SPI for other things if it's a reoccurring problem with the schedule. So those kinds of things will happen out there, and we'll talk about those. So. So any other questions? Questions? We got 17 minutes left here. I'm sorry?
Oh, I'm talking to myself. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Well, maybe it's not. I don't know.
Yeah, well,
it depends on what you're telling yourself, I guess. So any other questions out there? Anybody have any questions about the material, about the exam, about the application process? Everybody's working well on the application. You got your stuff out there. You went out to the PMI website and did the handbook thing, and you guys are comfortable with your application. I will say in years past, that's always been a problem. People stressed over that. And I recommend that you get this application, at least get the spreadsheet together. A lot of people stress over that, and then it's like, and they worry about it, so it's hanging over their head the whole time. And get it out of the way at the beginning, and then you don't have to worry about it anymore, and you don't have it hanging over your head. So if you haven't at least filled out the spreadsheet with all the stuff on there, make sure that you're there, that you've got that, and it's actually simpler now. It used to be you had to break down all those hours and stuff, and now it doesn't look like you have to do that anymore. So they're using like a month, how many months did you practice, not necessarily how many hours. So it looks like it's a simpler process now. So Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
What were you going to say?
I was going to say, where's the updated one? Because I filled out, I think I filled out the wrong one.
Well, if you filled out the one that we gave you, any one of them that we gave you should probably be good. But if you go out to the PMI website, they have like all those guidelines and stuff, because I know there's some changes there. But you're going to need to make sure that you got document your projects and show. I don't think you have to show the hours now. I think you just have to show, I started here and I ended here, and I started here and I ended here, and I started here and I ended here, and you got to know when all your projects were running. So. And then you have to have whatever the months are of continuous service kind of thing. So,
Cool.
So you should be good on that. I mean, but go out and look at it. Like I said, it's a lot simpler nowadays. And I guess again, when I was mentoring folks and teaching the class, people are asking me at the after the class is over with about the application process, and they've been fretting about it since the beginning of the class. And it's hard to study when that's, when you got all those other things hanging on your, like a big old sword of Damocles over you. So I recommend you get that done and out of the way as soon as you can. You don't have to fill it out on the web, but make sure you get all your stuff documented so you feel comfortable with it and you can just enter it and you're done. Other questions? Questions? Anybody have anything at all? I'll answer whatever questions I can. If not, I'll see what I can find out for you. Okay, well, last call, anybody? Going once? Going twice? Okay, well, thank you guys very much. Appreciate your time. You guys can all go ahead and log out there, and if you want to stick around, I'm here for 14 more minutes. I don't know if anybody else has any more questions or not, but feel free to stick around again when you log out. Make sure that you just leave the meeting, don't end it. Interesting watching the participants countdown. 25. Oh, we slowed down again. 24. Other questions? Anybody? No? No? If you're waiting for somebody to ask the question you want to ask, you're better off just asking it now.
No, I don't know if it's So we're gonna go over float, right? So
I'm sorry, you're gonna go over what?
Float.
Float. Yeah, you will talk about float.
Okay, we're gonna talk about it. Okay, so I'll wait.
Yeah. Yeah, float and Slack are the same thing, by the way, if that was your question. I don't know if it was. Float and Slack are the same thing. Think of total float, total Slack, free float, free. You probably won't see Slack on the exam, by the way. They kept telling me that used to be when I took my exam or prepared for my exam, they were calling it float in the book.
Right.
And they said, make sure you know that Slack and float are the same thing, but you might still have it on the exam because it used to be called Slack. It was never on mine, and now I don't know how many evolutions of the test later. I just don't know that Slack will make its appearance, but it's not that hard to equate Slack and float. They're the same thing. So
are we going over GERT next week as well, or no?
I'm sorry, going over what?
GERT, graphical evaluation and review techniques.
Wait, say that one more time.
Like GERT. I don't know how to explain it. It's just.
What's it? Spell it out again. It's
G-E-R-T.
G-E-R-T.
Yeah.
Not PERT, but GERT.
Well, no, PERT's the other one.
Yeah, I don't know GERT actually. I don't know. Was that on the material? I don't remember that from any of the other stuff. So I would hesitate to say it's going to be on. I hesitate to say it's not on the exam, but I don't know what GERT is. So.
Right. No, I'm studying all sorts of stuff. So I have I'm trying to be a sponge of information, I guess. I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking things.
Well, and that's back to the whole strategy of studying and test taking stuff. Like a project, you want to learn the material and only the material and nothing but the material kind of thing.
Gotcha.
Because you got all that other stuff that's complicating your life in there that's not part of it and it's not going to be on the exam. Right. I wouldn't worry too much about those things. I don't think GERT is going to be one of those things you have to worry about. And those things can hamstring you too. A lot of people, they come in and I've had this, more than one person has said, and some of the folks with PMN have probably told you, take what you learned at AT&T and throw it away. And the problem is that's not really good. I mean, aside from the fact that you can't do your AT&T work anymore because you don't know, because you threw it all away. But what we do at AT&T is PMI's project management stuff. We just don't use all of it. Some of it doesn't fit nice and neatly, but it's guidelines. PMI is a guideline. PMP is a guideline for best practices type of thing. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's out there that's not best practice, or is, it's new that they don't consider it best. Like when I talked about the earned value management, they're talking about the emerging trend is going to be actual schedules along with, plan value kind of thing and plan schedule and all those kinds, adding those extra things, and it never materialized. But if you're out there studying it and you're learning that, you might get hosed up when you're doing the real stuff on the exam. I tell people when you talked about what's the word I'm looking for, standard deviation. They have a formula for standard deviation. And if you use that on a math test or a statistic test, you will get every question wrong. But if you use real statistical standard deviation on the PMI exam, you will get those questions wrong. The standard deviation they give you will not yield a real standard deviation. And in many cases, it's not even a close approximation. But it's what you have to test with. So I highly recommend that you test, make sure you don't want to muddy the water with stuff that, while it may be best practices out there in some things, it's not what they want on the exam. So you got to make sure that you're not, I tell people don't buy both the Read a Book and the Andy Crow book, because you're reading two different books and it's the same material mostly, and the little bit of overlap or a little bit of lack of overlap, it's almost all overlap. A little bit that isn't, you're spending so much time reading two books that you're not concentrating on the stuff that you really need to. So don't dwell out there on that fringe stuff, and stick with the material. You should be good.
Okay.
Just an FYI. And I think GERT is one of those things, because for the life of me, that doesn't ring a bell at all, and I've been doing this for 20 years now. So,
right. Other
questions? We got 7 minutes left here, guys. 7 minutes left here. No.
Probably the 5 before I find an obscure question somewhere.
Other questions. I don't know. You guys are all hanging around either because you're hoping somebody's going to ask your question, or you're worried that there's a question out there that you don't want to miss. But if it's your question, you might as well ask it, get it out of the way, and then you can go. You can clock out there. But if not, you feel free to go ahead and sign off. But I guess we don't have anybody like that right now. You guys get credit if you leave now. I'm not going to dock you for leaving early. And everybody's still hanging on here. It's an interesting phenomena. I'll tell you what, I'll make it easy for you guys. We got 6 minutes left, so I'm going to just go ahead and call it for the night, and then I'll get off the line so you don't feel like you're going to miss something. And if you have questions, feel free to text me, cue me, email me. If you want to get a question, you want to put something on the calendar, we can talk. My calendar's usually up to date, so it shouldn't be a problem. All right, guys. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time today. Hopefully you learn. Oh, wait. We have a. Actually, I do have a question out here. Somebody typed it in here. Exam simulator. Oh, here. Let's see. If anyone. Oh, there's a lot of questions. A lot of stuff out here. Got this. Anyone know when the attendance site is going to be updated? I do not know that question. Also, does anybody know when this material and the recordings are going to be uploaded on the wiki? I do not know that question either. Last files, okay, I know that. Reminder, the person responsible for updating the wiki, Brian Berry, so he should be back soon here. Did not receive those. If anybody's looking to purchase the PrepCast PMP exam simulator, as a promo code to save you about $20. Oh, there you go, that's nice. Do we know what chapters we should be reading for Wednesday's class, or did I miss an email? No, you didn't, and that thing I was showing you guys at the end there. So I'll actually send that out tomorrow morning, so you guys will have that for a day or so. Probably not anything to study. It's more so for us to walk through, but I'll send that out anyway. All right, guys. I'm going to let you all go. You guys all have a good one, and I'll see you guys Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
All righty.